This episode is brought to you by the Disney Plus Hulu Max bundle with plans starting at just $16.99 a month. Stream the latest seasons of The Last of Us on Max, Andor on Disney Plus, and the final season of The Handmaid's Tale on Hulu. All of these and more streaming soon. Terms apply. Visit Disney Plus Hulu Max Bundle.com for more details.
This is the Long Island Report on 107.1 WLIR. Using common sense, talking Long Island issues. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia.
Good afternoon. This is the Long Island Report. This is Judge Richard Weinberg. With me is my esteemed colleague and very good friend, Jesse Garcia. Jesse is the vice chair of the state Republican Party and the county chair of the Suffolk Republican Party. In the studio with us is another close and wonderful friend, Tony Carbonetti. Tony Carbonetti is a wise and distinguished public servant. He's in the private sector now for all the years of the Giuliani administration. He was the chief of staff to Mayor Giuliani, one of the people who truly helped to save our city, and an astute public policy and political analyst. So the three of us are going to have a conversation. Let me start off by talking about what I'll call the Trump factor in the midterm elections. This is my view, and I talked about this previously, but I want to say it again because I think it's worthy of talking about. Tony is a Republican. Jesse is Republican. I'm the House Democrat. But my view is that Trump had a very successful presidency. He was very good on his public policies. He was very good on the economy. He was very good on the threats to us internationally, particularly the Chinese. Our borders were safe. Our economy was good. He was a good president. Biden, in my humble opinion, is a failure as a president. He's done everything wrong. I can't think of anything that Biden has done right. And I say that as a Democrat. But I think the wild card for the midterm elections is the Trump factor. I think there's a civil war going on in the Republican Party, just as there's a civil war going on in the Democratic Party. And I'm very concerned. Everybody is very sanguine about a so-called red wave, which would give us balanced government, checks and balances against the Democrats controlling the House, the Senate, and the presidency. And I think Trump can undermine that with some of the candidates he's pushed forward for Congress and for the United States Senate. And I'm not sanguine that the Senate will be won by the Republicans, and I don't think the Republicans will win the House as strongly as they think they will. So first I'll turn it over to Tony, then for his comments, and then we'll turn it over to Jesse for his comments.
Well, thank you, Judge, for having me, and thank you, Jesse. When you talk about the Trump factor, I'm starting to liken it to the Tea Party. We're going to determine now this election day whether it's similar to the Tea Party, where he can get candidates through primaries but not get them elected in a general election. And if that turns out to be the case, we're all going to suffer. You know, we had, was it 2 or 3 Senate seats back in the Tea Party days that we knew we were going to win, and then the Tea Party ended up winning those primaries, and we lost the general election. I think we thought we were taking Harry Reid out at one point.
Yeah, that's what the Greeks call a Pyrrhic victory.
Yes.
A false victory.
Yes. So I think that's what we have to determine this cycle, and I think everyone's waiting to see just how much punch the Trump wave has. And we'll see that here. On the Democratic side, I think the Democrats haven't suffered from the progressive movement because the progressives are taking out Democrats in Democratic primaries that are Democratic seats. So they haven't had to put them forth for a general election in a real purple area or a place they could lose. So the progressives keep beating their chest saying they're victorious, but they're winning seats. They're winning primaries in seats they can't lose in November.
Very interesting. Jesse, your take.
I understand that, and I think that when you have primaries of any level throughout this county, the state, or the country, you're going to have those type of situations work out and come to be. I really can't speak to a lot of things that are nationally, but at least here in Suffolk County and the state of New York. I think that the primaries that they've shaken out actually have helped in our abilities to secure even more House seats than we were looking at. Just looking at the fact of what we did here in Suffolk County when we had, we had people spending $3.2 million for the purposes of not so much the Trump factor, but, for their own cryptocurrency industry and creating a special interest there. And, of course, we had those people who touted that they were Trump, but really weren't backed by Trump or really involved in Trump at all. They bought endorsements from lower level associates of the Trump administration. So I think that as you speak to New York, especially down here in downstate, that, we've put forward candidates that embrace and actually exude the principles of the Trump presidency, and in many cases share those with the president, and also that the basic tenets and fundamental principles of the Republican Party, which are in sync, and the voters responded to that. But I don't disagree. There are some places throughout the country, as Tony pointed out and you have pointed out, Your Honor, that some of the candidates that have come forward may be problematic in the general election. But I still, the goal is still to take back the House. I think that's going to be successful. I think that path to the House is coming through Long Island and maybe electing 4 congressmen from Long Island for the first time in generation, and then throughout the state and the country.
No, I think that's right. I mean, the House, I think we're pretty secure. I don't know. In New York, they beat back the gerrymandering, but in other states around the country, I think the gerrymandering has been such that we can't win the 60 seats, but we could surely win low 40s, maybe high 30s, and be pretty secure. I was specifically talking about the 2 Senate races in Georgia and Pennsylvania, where I think we may have nominated candidates that aren't electable statewide, and we'll see. That was my concern, Jesse.
Yeah, I do believe I see the issues in Pennsylvania are problematic, and there's absolutely, and Georgia, that's going to seem to be shaken out. It just seems that they're doing a lot of amateur type of mistakes.
And Arizona, I think I got to throw Arizona in there too.
And that's right, Arizona too. I think that they're making mistakes and that are amateurish, and you can't buy that back that time. And Tony, that as you've run successful campaigns yourself, that's one thing that you try to not create mistakes that you have to go back and fix.
I had a meeting this morning with a congressman who's running for the United States Senate in North Carolina, Ted Budd, and very bright guy, a good patriot, understands the issues. He's running in North Carolina, which I think by every stretch of imagination is either characterized as a swing state or as a purple state. And he's running against the former Chief Justice of that state, an African-American woman. So I think it's going to be a tough seat. Now, he was endorsed by Trump, and he beat a former governor of North Carolina, a very popular governor, McCrory, and he was victorious. But when you sat down with him, you saw he understood what the country needed, what the people in North Carolina needed. He understood the threats to the country, what the issues were. He had a real sense of balance. He was a real grown-up. And I walked away from our meeting very, very impressed. And I said to myself, these are the kinds of people that we need to have in the United States Senate. It's absolutely essential because you have a White House which is out of control, which doesn't respect the difference between an executive order and legislation, which is pushing forward, for example, giving a write-off on student loans, which is a total sham. It's going to only raise taxes. It's inflationary. It's a kick in the face to everybody who, like Tony or you or me, who've paid for the tuition for ourselves or for our kids. It's a terrible thing, but it's using governmental money, and he's going to try to do this by executive order, which I don't think he has the legal authority to do this before the midterms. There's a lot of bad policy and bad economics and bad national security decisions coming out of the Biden administration. It becomes absolutely essential, again, as a House Democrat, I'm saying this, that there's a countervailing force, countervailing voices of reason and common sense. And the only way we can get that unfortunately, is through the Republican Party, because my party doesn't seem to be able to rein in its crazy left.
You mean to tell me, Judge, that saying to these young people that I'm going to give you up to $10,000 off of your student loans, but only if the Democrats get elected, that's not buying votes, right?
I mean, Jesse, don't you think, doesn't it make your eyes bleed and your head explode to you? I want the money back. I have 4 degrees that I paid for myself. I want that back. My wife has 2 degrees. I want that money back. I have 2 daughters, one an MBA, one a lawyer. I want all that money back.
And now they're buying votes with your tax dollars. Gotta love it.
What do you say, Jesse?
I can't. I'm not going to disagree with you at all. I want my college tuition back at that point too. The problem is, the Democrats want to. There's an endless pit of money from the Democrats' point of view, but it creates our debt and it leads to our inflation. We're seeing that right now at record inflation, and their playbook goes back. They go back to their playbook all the time when their policies are failing, and and in real time they're being felt, whether it's economically. Crime in the streets, or internationally, where we don't feel safe on a national security basis because we've become small on the global scale. They go to their playbook of trying to distract and buy off. It may have worked in some cases. I don't believe it's going to work this time.
Jesse, and I used to say this all the time because the media has actually bought into it and helped the Democrats create this. So if you ask someone, what do you think of the New York City public school system? They say, oh, it's terrible. It's poorly run. They waste money. How about if I told you I was going to give an extra $3 billion to the school system, but I had to raise your taxes? Oh, okay, as long as you're giving them more money. But you just said it was poorly run. But that they've convinced everyone that money is the answer for all of these problems. Just throw more money at it, and it's not going to get better. Good. How about running it the way it should be run?
Look, this is a crisis because let's talk about the state legislature, Jesse and Tony. So you have a Democratic Socialist of America, a woman named Gonzalez, just won an open state Senate seat in Queens, and she's out there pounding her chest and bragging. She said, "The socialists won. The socialists won. Now we're going to take over the city." We're going to have socialist slates everywhere, top to bottom, throughout the whole country. And I say to this, and by the way, she's 26 years old, so what has she ever done in her life? What does she actually know about economics, public policy, the law, the institutions of our country? What does she know? She doesn't. And by the way, the dirty little secret about this woman before she ran for the state Senate, she flirted herself out as a working class person. She was a tech person. No, actually, she was a product leader for American Express. So, taking you off the campaign literature, the fact that she worked for the biggest capitalist enterprise you can ever think of, American Express, but she packages herself as a working class person, kind of like AOC.
Yeah, you kind of wonder if they understand where the tax dollars come from. They see the dollar figure in the budget, and they think they get to carve it up. But year after year, that money has to come from somewhere. And if you're destroying businesses and chasing people who pay big taxes out, before long, that money's not going to be there.
You mean sometimes you run out of other people's money?
Exactly. You run out of other people's money. No, again, these people have only signed the front of a paycheck. They've never, they've only signed the back of a paycheck. They've never actually paid employees.
No, they never had to open up the doors to the
pay the rent, pay the staff,
close it, pay the insurance, pay the staff what they were owed, take care of the health care, take care of the family leave obligations.
It's very easy with government money because it's always there, they think.
And with government money being poured out, if you don't think that's a proximate cause of inflation, I don't know, then you really need a basic economics course. All right, this is Judge Richard Weinberg. This is the Long Island Report. I'm with Chairman Jesse Garcia, the Republican Party, and Tony Carbonetti, the former Chief of Staff to Mayor Rudy Giuliani, a great friend and a great public servant. We're taking a break. We'll be back in a moment.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
It's the Long Island Report, using common sense, talking Long Island issues. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia on 107.1 WLIR.
Welcome back. This is the Long Island Report. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. In the studio with me is Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party and Tony Carbonetti, the former Chief of Staff to Mayor Rudy Giuliani, a great public servant and a good friend. Both Jesse and Tony, Republicans they may be, great public servants and good friends, and I'm very privileged to be on the show with them. The first part of the show, we were talking about the Trump factor in the midterm elections and the politics of that. I want to change the conversation a little bit. I want to talk about the Biden administration's impact on America's future. So, Jesse, I'd like to begin with you. I'm very concerned, but I want to hear from you, your views, and then Tony's view about the Biden administration's impact on America's future.
I think that and the views I'm getting, and these are not just my personal views, but these are the views I'm getting from literally hundreds, if not thousands, of volunteers that have been going to different households in advance of our candidates for the general election and in primaries over these last 4 months. And they're frightened. They think that America's days are behind them now. We're not secure economically. We're not secure at home with cashless bail. We're not secure we're on energy. We're not energy independent any longer. We're energy dependent. We don't build anything at home anymore. We have inflation that's, at skyrocketing cases. That's another tax on middle class families. And they're facing situations where grocery shelves are still empty. Groceries are at a high in prices, and gas is still at $4 a gallon. There is a lot of pessimism. The pessimism that I have not felt and seen since I was a young man, from 1976 to 1979, when Jimmy Carter was our president. As a Republican, I'm always hopeful and optimistic about what we can do because we can change every course of a pattern. We did that in 1980 with President Reagan. We did that under President Bush, and we did that under President Trump. So I do think that as we take the steps forward to change the direction of this country with some common sense principles of the Republican Party, and more importantly, a check and balances in government, the end of one-party rule, whether it be in Albany and Washington, D.C., that is going to lead to a more prosperous America.
Tony.
When I think of the Biden administration, there's a saying, you spend a lifetime building a reputation and a minute to destroy it. Everything you just mentioned, Jesse, public safety, energy, these are things that we thought we had solved. We thought we were the country was heading in the right direction economically. Most of the big cities were, relatively safe. We were becoming energy independent. We were energy independent, and then all of a sudden, in less than 2 years, this is all fallen off of a cliff. I mean, there's even a case of polio. Who thought polio would be back? Like the Biden administration is bringing back the bad old days.
Well, gentlemen, I have to tell you something. I mean this sincerely. I cannot think of one thing that the Biden administration has done right. And I was optimistic because Biden started off his presidency with an inaugural address. We promised to bring the country together again, to be a unifying figure, not a divisive one. So let's start with my concerns, the impact of the Biden administration. I think this country is more divided today than it's been in my lifetime. And I lived through the 60s, the 1960s. I don't mean the 1860s before the Civil War. I mean the 1960s. So it's more divided than it's ever been. You have a polarized country, and people look at the other side of the political chessboard, and they see not opponents, but they see enemies. The hostility, the viciousness, the personal attacks, the unwillingness to confront issues on the merits, the ideological compulsion. It's all about ideology. It's not about common sense and doing the right thing for the country. So that in itself is a disaster. On the policies, the economics, as Jesse correctly pointed out, what happened? We were energy independent. We can be energy independent again. All we have to do is open up our spigots, open up our pipelines, use the Canadian oil that comes from Canada into the United States, use the fracking that's available, use the oil out of Alaska, which would be a couple of million barrels a day. We don't have to have gas prices that range from $4 to over $5, depending whether you're using regular or some sort of premium. And everything in the supply chain is impacted by the gas. So
but
the delivery people.
Judge, you need $4 and $5 gasoline if you want to spend money like they do on renewables, because they have to say, see, gas prices are so high, we have to now invest in something that's going to happen 70 years from now.
Well, that's very interesting.
They need high gas prices.
No, but that's very interesting about renewables. Jesse, you and I have talked about this. You know, these Green New Deal policies that are foisted upon us by the Biden administration, and in New York by the state legislature and city council, but by the Biden administration, is a total denial of the technological realities of that.
And who's making the batteries?
Of course. Who has the lithium? Who has the lithium? Okay. Jesse, your turn.
No, I completely agree. I mean, I started off this segment as discussing that is the pessimism of America because of the Biden administration. And I think Anthony pointed it out. There's been everything that we discussed was solved as of 2 years ago. Now we're not back to zero. We're actually in a negative now. We had to dig our way out of it.
Right? Doesn't it feel like that?
No,
it feel like that.
It feels like that to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
without
look,
question.
and another thing, public safety. The messages from the Justice Department under this administration is that the police are alien forces in our cities, victimizing our people. That's their ethos. That's their culture.
I don't know who signs up to be a police officer these days.
Neither do I.
You can be sued personally. They can take your pension away. They could take your family. I mean, who's signing up for that?
It's a tough job, and they've made it an awful job. And every day, these local state legislators and the councils get up and come up with another crazy idea to try to emasculate law enforcement, to demoralize law enforcement, and to unwind public safety. Every day they come up with it. And the Biden administration, led by what I believe to be a distinguished federal judge, Merrick Garland, who was a nominee for the Supreme Court of the United States, he's done nothing to encourage in me any confidence that this federal administration, led by the Biden team, have any idea what you need to do to get our cities back on safe ground. And in fact, the other thing is, this is not just, and you, Jesse, you understand this, this is not just a city issue because it flows over into the suburbs. Talk about that.
Absolutely. And I think I'll point out, they look as cops as aliens. They look at parents who voice their opinions at school board meetings on the behalf of their children's education as domestic terrorists. It's all wrong. They use their powers to politicize the Department of Justice through the Mar-a-Lago raid. They call parents who are fighting for the best education of their children domestic terrorists, and they're handcuffing cops. It's remarkable how dysfunctional they are. And to speak to what Anthony said at a different segment, and the media has bought in on this. The media has been their megaphone on this. They're amplifying it to try to change the general consensus and consciousness of the electorate. But fortunately, that's not happening because the people are too smart and they're seeing through it.
Yeah, people have lost so much faith in the media, but it's it was self-inflicted. They did it. They built up narratives. They only print what fits those narratives, and then when they're proved wrong, they don't even admit it. They just go on to the next thing.
Listen, the same people in the Justice Department who led the raid on Mar-a-Lago, the former president's residence in the state of Florida, the same unit and the same personalities, the same people who gave the Russia false collusion hoax. I mean, how do you have confidence in a Justice Department that does that and says, well, he has nuclear codes or secret formulas for nuclear weapons? I mean, what is that? I want to see that affidavit. Don't tell me this in generalized and leaks to the press. And you're a prosecutor, you're Justice Department, you're not supposed to leak. I want to see that affidavit, and I want to see what the fundamental factual basis is and the credibility of the people who swore to get a warrant against a former president of the United States who's a future possible competitor against the incumbent president. It's not just that he's a former president, but he is somebody who's a potential competitor. And you know what they just did? What the Biden administration just did? They said that Trump, when he's asking for the documents back, they're saying, well, and Trump has asserted executive privilege, amongst other things, and attorney-client privilege. They're saying, oh, no, he has no right to executive privilege. We're waiving it. Let me get this straight for our listeners. The privilege rests with the former president, not with the current president. If it rests with a future president, not the one who's asserting it, who had it before, then there's no such thing as executive privilege. We had Alan Dershowitz on the show Catch the Night last night, and Alan and I talked about this. Once you say that the Biden administration can waive the Trump's executive privilege, you might as well take executive privilege, throw it out the window. And if you don't have executive privilege, as Tony and I and Jesse, you too, being insiders in government, know, you'll never have open and candid discussion between the office holders and staff.
Right. If an office holder can speak to someone that's intelligent in a certain field, and that person says, it's going to be confidential, if that guy thinks it's going to get leaked 4 years later, he's not going to come brief you on anything, whether it's energy or domestic policy or whatever. Or
not give you the right advice because they're afraid the history books will damn them. Jesse, last thought before we take our break.
I agree with you. I think Tony and I both served as chief of staff to executive. His a lot larger than mine. I was the chief of staff to the Brookhaven supervisor with 450,000 people. But it gives you that ability to have a free and open discourse so that you can get to the best consensus and the best policy.
Well, we're going to take a break now. We'll be back in a few minutes. This is Judge Richard Weinberg on the Long Island Report with Jesse Garcia, the Republican chair of Suffolk County and the vice chair of the state Republican Party, and Tony Carbonetti, a great public servant, now in the private sector, a great political analyst, public policy analyst, and one of the people who helped save this city during the awful days that they confronted during the Giuliani administration, bringing back law and order and public safety to our streets and overcoming the attack that we suffered on 9/11 of 2001. We will be back in a few moments.
This is the Long Island Report on 107.1 WLIR. Using common sense, talking Long Island issues. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia.
This is the Long Island Report. We are back. This is Judge Richard Weinberg. With me is Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party and Tony Carbonetti, the former chief of staff to Mayor Rudy Giuliani. During the break, ladies and gentlemen, amongst the three of us, we were talking because we're coming up on the anniversary of 9/11. And Jesse, you had a very, very good point. So why don't you begin the discussion?
Sure. We're coming up on the 21st anniversary of it, and history tends and people tend to forget what happens on days of tragedy. And Tony, you were right there in the middle of it, and I know Congressman Grucci was there with the president when he addressed and visited Ground Zero. But too many people forget. They forget the dangers that are out there. They forget the heroism of first responders, police officers, your administration, average citizens that came to the aid of others. And they forget the patriotism that glued this country together.
1,000%. I mean, Jesse, I don't know where to start because you're so right in that, first of all, at that point in time, the country was unified and there were no Republicans and Democrats. We were Americans. And first and foremost, you helped your neighbor, whether they had lost a loved one or been personally injured or personally lost something downtown. Everyone, no one asked to see your political ID card. It was, come, let me take care of you. I mean, we had people that lived downtown that when the first plane hit, then the second plane hit, they jumped on boats, little ferries, and went over to Jersey with nothing. Some of them had just come outside after the first crash, looked up and saw what was going on, and then the second plane hits. Literally, so people ended up in New Jersey with not a dime on them. They stayed in restaurants and hotels, and everyone took care of each other. Everyone knows about the flights, but the whole city, the whole country was unified. And who did we support? We supported our first responders, the people that ran in. I'm one of the few people you'll ever meet that I was in both towers that morning. I walked through both towers after they were hit. I watched the firefighters lining up, and they were doing their job. Okay, I spoke to Bill Thean before, God rest his soul. He died when the second tower collapsed. He looked at me and the mayor and our group, and he says, I have a rescue team in the North Tower. They're going to ascertain whether we can get through the crash, but we're getting everyone out. It was a matter of fact, we're getting everyone out of those buildings from the crash down. South Tower, same thing. I have Rescue 1 up there. They're going to ascertain whether we get through the crash. And the mayor said, well, can we rescue people with the helicopter? And he said, it's too hot. He said, there's too much heat coming off the building. I guess the air gets very light, the hotter it gets. And he goes, if the helicopter landed, it won't be able to take off. So that's why they're just circling up there. They're afraid to get too close. And it was the tragedy of it was these guys were doing their jobs. And they didn't stop for 1 second to think about politics. It was our country was under attack, and we're responding. And that's the greatest moment, of sacrifice. And our whole country was united after that. And how we got 20 years later to where we are, it's just, it's disgusting, I think.
Well, and so you were at the executive branch's end of City Hall, and I was at the City Council end of City Hall. And I remember Peter Vallone, the Speaker of the Council, and I and other senior staff people, we went down to Ground Zero. We went to the churches and the schools and the armories where the pictures of the missing were there. We would try to comfort the people. We helped try to help communications. We kept going back and back and back. Never thought of our own safety, of what we were sucking into our lungs when we went there. I remember when I had to go back to my back office space because I had two offices, one at City Hall and one back office space at 75 Park Place, where my files were. And that 75 Park Place is the famous pictures you saw of all the debris going north from the Trade Center going uptown. That's where 75 Park Place was, a few blocks away from City Hall. I had to put on a hazmat suit to get the files. They wouldn't and they only let me stay for a couple of minutes because I needed to have active files because we had to have city council meetings, and Tony remembers this. Yep. And we couldn't do the city council meetings at City Hall because it was not safe to have.
There was no Zoom then either.
That's right. It wasn't safe to do the meetings at City Hall. So the public library allowed us to do city council meetings so we could do emergency legislation and financing to get the city going again. And the wonderful thing about the mayor Giuliani, and the speaker, Peter Vallone, is we immediately, when we were having discussions, and Tony, you must remember this, we said the first thing we're going to do, and this conversation, remember, this happened on a Tuesday. We were already meeting again on Wednesday at City Hall on Thursday. We were there having meetings, working. We said we have to create a commission to rebuild New York.
Yep.
That was the vision of Giuliani, the Republican, Vallone, the Democrat. Let's work together. We have to save and protect the city. We're going to rebuild the city.
We're not going to show the world.
We're going to show the world. We're not going to let the terrorists beat us down. and that was the country, which is a good segue. And thanks, Jesse, for bringing this up. It was wonderful. This is a good segue to the next question I want to ask you, gentlemen. How do we get America back to common sense politics and public policy and governance and a sense of unity? Jesse, what do you say?
I think that comes with the individuals that we nominate and elect to public office. It's important for them to understand that reaching a consensus and reaching agreement and reaching across the aisle is not a bad thing. It's like any type of contractual agreement, whether you're a Major League Baseball team and a ball player or a labor union and a business or a municipality. The best way to do this is to negotiate things because it gets the best deal for all parties. Not everyone walks away happy. Not everyone walks away upset or angry. The issue is that the basic needs of each group gets addressed. And that's one of the things we're missing here. We're missing the basic discourse between colleagues to make sure that we can put something greater than our party affiliation and our own personal interest ahead of the needs of the people. And I think that we've lost that along the way. We've gone from the politics of solutions to the politics of slogans and slander.
Jesse, you're 100% right, because I've watched this happen, and I like to use the example of the 7-year-old version of myself when I was the rabid Yankee fan. I used to have my little I Hate Boston Red Sox T-shirt, I Hate Boston button. I was the Yankee fan club member, I'd never met anyone from Boston. I never, now fast forward when I was a freshman at Boston University, I'm sitting at a ball game with a buddy I met there from Boston, having the time of my life, having a couple of beers, watching a baseball game. The 7-year-old version of myself is what we've become. You don't know the other side, so therefore you hate them. And, I'm afraid that our cell phones, our social media, you're only seeing what you believe in. You never see the other side. You never sit with that other person and say, gee, even though he's a Red Sox fan, we both love baseball and he's a great guy, right? That's what we're missing.
Well, Jesse has said this, and I wish you would comment on it, Jesse. Jesse has made the point that in this era of wokeism, of political correctness, of censorship, we're losing any attempt in good faith to seek a unity and a common purpose and negotiate a fair compromise. Jesse.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's the one problem that we've had with social media. People are sticking into their little holes in this area of wokeism. The other problem that we have is, I think we touched upon it a little bit before, is that some of the fundamental institutions that we've had faith in have failed us. Either they failed us on their own merits, or they failed us because they were weaponized by partisanship. We've seen that in the Department of Justice, the FBI. We've seen that in the mainstream media. People are not trusting these institutions these national institutions that we've for years trusted before. We need to get back to taking the partisanship out of law enforcement. We need to start getting more fairness back into our media. They cannot become the partners of the DNC or one political party, Republican or Democrat. They can't do that because it's the average American, the average New Yorker that suffers when that occurs.
Well, let me add. I think that's well said. Let me add to this following danger. We have wonderful institutions created by our Constitution, and they've lived for these couple of 100-odd years because they've built a formula to stand the test of time. And now you have political opponents who are saying, "Well, we don't like the Supreme Court decision,
Absolutely.
so we're gonna pack the court.
Let's add 60 more justices.
Exactly.
How many do I need?
Yeah. How many do I need to get the result I want?" Or filibusters are a device to work for compromise and to avoid the tyranny of the majority, which if you read the Federalist Papers, that's what the Founding Fathers were concerned about, a tyranny of majority. It slows down the legislative process so you don't pass bad legislation with one party rule. So I submit to you, if we're going to get back common sense governance and unity in this country, one, we ought to start teaching our kids and teaching each other the common shared values we have, the value of our institutions, respecting the other person's point of view, even if you disagree. As Tony correctly pointed out, sit down with that Yankee fan, sit down with that Boston Red Sox fan, have the beer, see the common humanity that we all have.
I think you need to force people to do that. I really do.
Yeah.
Well, Kevin has given us that sign again. We're going to take a break. This is Judge Richard Weinberg with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party and Tony Carbonetti, our good friend, who is the former chief of staff to Mayor Rudy Giuliani, America's mayor, who saved us through the worst times of the 2000s and the last days of the 1990s. I will be right back with our final segment with Jesse and with Tony.
My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
This is the Long Island Report on 107.1 WLIR. Using common sense, talking Long Island issues. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia.
This is the Long Island Report. We're back. This is Judge Richard Weinberg. With me is Tony Carbonetti, former chief of staff to Mayor Rudy Giuliani, America's mayor, as well as Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party, my esteemed co-host. There's this idea out there that they keep pushing through. The Democrats in the New York State legislature push this through, and Governor Hochul says she's all aboard on it, and it's called congestion pricing. And I think it's a bad idea, and I'd like to know what its true costs are and what the impacts are. Tony, what do you say?
We've been talking about congestion pricing for 20 plus years. In that 20-year period, has anyone done it successfully where we can turn to them and say, great, you guys did a wonderful job, let's copy that? Am I missing that place?
London is walking away from it. They're trying to get out of it right now as we speak.
So we want to get into it.
Makes perfect sense.
Let's buy some Bitcoin while we're at it.
Well, listen, the same people who love socialism love congestion pricing. Ideas that don't work are totally impractical, but they force them through one-party rule down people's throats. And Jesse, who's going to be hurt by this congestion pricing? What's its true cost?
It's a middle-class taxpayer who's going to be paying $35 a day. It's not even just people from Long Island going into New York City. It's from borough. But what's scary is that in all the 20 years that we've been discussing congestion pricing and never finding a pilot program or even anything that we could copy that shows it's successful, is that these crazy one-party rules, progressive Democrats, they have the ability and the wherewithal to just impose it without care, just because it's another notch in their political belt.
Well, you know,
that's the scariest part of it.
No, it's scary because they have this narrative that somehow this is going to help save the planet and the environment. So let me submit to you, as the common sense Democrat, dealing with two common sense Republicans on this show, let me tell you as follows. It's bad for commuters because it's a tax on commuters. It's bad for economic development and the economic viability of the city of New York because the restaurants will go down, the theater won't work, the cultural institutions will go down, retail will go down, people will not come here, trucking costs will go up, so the price of groceries and commodities will go up. And environmentally, you know what's going to happen? They're going to have a zone that if you go below 60th Street, then you're going to have to pay this. So what you're going to do is you get everybody avoiding coming in from the south part, and they're going to lined up in the Bronx. And what you're going to have is you're going to have all that pollution on the Cross Bronx Expressway going into the atmosphere because the pollution knows where to stop, doesn't it? Pollution knows. It knows exactly where that red line is that the crazy environmentalists are pushing.
No, I think, I would, again, if I worked for the governor right now, I would say, here's a handful of people we need to talk to. the people that did it in London. Talk to the restaurant, who has the restaurant association, the taxi cab association. Let's talk to the people in government, the budget guy, the tourism person, and let's find out what happened. Before we jump into this pool, let's go talk to the people that actually did it.
The city of New York is still trying to recover from the COVID crisis. And what do we have? 40% occupancy in the commercial buildings?
If we're lucky.
And you walk up and down the streets and you see all this open retail for rent signs. And tons of restaurants have gone out of business. And there's no audience in the theater community or Lincoln Center or Carnegie Hall. And the museums are underpopulated with tourists. We've gone from 60, I think John Cassidy says 66 million people a year coming into the city. We have a fraction of that from foreign tourists. And now on top of that, you want to have a tax on working people to pay this. And the numbers are staggering. This will be in the thousands and thousands of thousands of dollars with people coming in.
So we're technically, I believe, sitting in the zone now, correct? We're on 50th and 3rd.
Exactly right.
So on Lexington, there's 3 hotels between 48th and 51st.
Including the Waldorf Astoria.
But that have yet to, well, that's 4. I wasn't even counting that. That's 4 that have yet to open.
Right.
So
and plus you have a whole bunch of...
Reopening's not been easy, and they want to add this.
Yeah, and you have a whole bunch of hotels, by the way. That's a good point, Tony, that have already announced that they're not reopening. For example, Guy Lombardo's, to give away my age, Guy Lombardo's Roosevelt Hotel, who always brought you in New Year's Eve. Jesse, you've probably read about that in the ancient history books.
Well, the other thing is, one part of the narrative is they want to encourage people to use mass transit. That's not going to happen. People don't feel safe in mass transit.
Are we giving out bulletproof vests?
Right. I mean, really.
Yeah, exactly.
Would you let your son on a subway in New York, Jesse? Would you let
Absolutely
your daughters,
not.
Tony?
Jesse, I have 2 daughters, 17 and 19. And quite honestly, 7 years ago, I was saying, okay, I have to teach them the subway system. They're New Yorkers. And I wouldn't let them go on the subway in a million years right now. The last 7 years have been so horrific. But 7 years ago, things were okay. And I was getting to the point where I got to teach them. Not a chance in hell right now.
Okay. Let's switch gears. I want to talk to you about what I call the Trump search warrant fiasco. Going back to an earlier theme we've been talking about, I see it as another nail in the coffin of American unity. I think this was totally and absolutely, I say this as a lawyer, as a former state Supreme Court justice, and as a former prosecutor, I think this was totally and absolutely mishandled governmentally, politically, legally. What say you, Tony?
Short of child porn, they have no reason to go in there and raid the former president's home. I don't. They better have something good, because otherwise, all they're doing is empowering him. If this is a note from one head of state to another head of state, is technically top secret. So if it's the Prime Minister of Japan, here's a dozen golf balls, have a good round. If
because
that's the top secret,
because everything gets classified.
Exactly. If that's your top, and if it's not, show me, because they have no credibility. They've lost credibility.
And I want to see that affidavit. And as we've said in the earlier segment, if it doesn't substantiate that there's something serious here, the Justice Department, the FBI have lost credibility, and they've lost an awful lot of credibility. And we have a crisis of public confidence in the law enforcement agencies.
Better be real.
It better be real, because again, going back to Jesse's point, we've lost confidence and trust in our institutions. What say you, Jesse?
I completely agree with you. And there's 2 other factors I want to add into this. Just earlier this week, the president said that he was never made aware, had zero pre-knowledge before that raid was going forward. Tony, you've worked for an executive. I worked for an executive from different levels. And matters of this import always get to their desk. They have to be briefed because they have to be prepared. So I think what's happening is that further divides this country because
no one believes that
the president is lying to them. He's lying to them, and there's political cover. The second thing is there's an ongoing legal battle now on the inventory of what was taken from the president's home. I believe, and I agree with him, there should be a special master there that reviews what was taken, what was needed for this investigation. Because right now, I don't believe that you can trust those individuals, the administration and the leadership of the FBI that forced the administration of this warrant and this raid. There's just no trust. I believe it's on the Garland administration and the Department of Justice, and it's on the president himself to be as transparent and independent as possible when it comes to this, because they have placed into jeopardy one of the basic tenets of our Constitution.
Jesse, I don't understand. They knew they knew the criticism would come. Can they be this ill prepared? Can they really be, like, they didn't think Trump was going to hit back? They didn't think that, even forget Trump supporters, the average person wouldn't be appalled by this?
Tony, that's what I think it is. I think the average person is appalled.
Yes.
This is not the MAGA hat.
Right. Oh, no, absolutely not.
Supporter. This is the average American, the average New Yorker.
Yes. This is the average person saying, that was the president. You don't do that to the former president. You know, there's other ways to handle this. And by the way, the liberal media always said, well, he never read his daily presidential briefings. And now all of a sudden he's taking documents? Which one was it?
Look, let's be clear. You had to exit City Hall, Tony. I had to exit City Hall when our terms were over.
Yes.
At the end of 2001. Believe me, and I'm sure you had the same situation, Jesse, when you left different positions. You get the boxes. You throw everything into the box. You tape up the box. You put your name on it. You have it delivered somewhere, and then you get around to looking at it. You know,
Probably never.
No. Well, thank you. Now you're sounding my wife, because I want to tell you, gentlemen, this is full disclosure to you and to the audience. I have boxes from my days as a judge. Boxes in several different venues, all taped up, which I haven't opened. I can't begin to tell you what I have in those boxes.
To be opened upon my death.
My wife keeps saying, you know, when you're gone, it's going to be on us to clean this up.
We're going to have to open those damn things up.
I'm going to sign up Jesse Garcia and Tony Carbonetti to help my wife open up those boxes from 5.5+ years ago. So I want to end this segment in this show by saying the purpose of the Long Island Report and the purpose of our discussion is to try to make America a better place, to try to save our country. There is no hidden agenda. There is no overt agenda. The agenda is to have a free and fair discussion. We have Democrats on the show. We have Republicans on the show. We have people who have no politics on the show. But there are issues that we're facing. This is an age of confrontation. We have to come back to the common sense center. We have to deal with real issues, which are real problems, with real solutions, and not look for Pyrrhic political victories and beat at each other's throats. And I want to thank Tony Carbonetti, our special guest today, and
Thanks for having me.
And my wonderful co-host, Chairman Jesse Garcia, the Republican Party. This has been the Long Island Report. We look forward to having you back with us again next week. We wish you and your families all good health and great safety. Thank you.